Hello everybody, Joshua Rorty here, Jeremy Rorty with Rising Phoenix Martial Arts. We've done a couple of videos now where we talk about bringing a weapon into your self-defense. If you haven't seen our self-defense weapons video yet, make sure you go back and check it out. One of the common threads that comes through on that is we always mention that if you bring a weapon into the fight, it's not your weapon, it's our weapon. And keep in mind the other guy gets a choice as to how that weapon gets used. We have a whole system in our Kali syllabus that has to deal with retaining your stick or retaining your knife. We're going to pick out just a couple of the key ones that work in most situations. So now, like we mentioned in a lot of our videos, we're going to start sounding a little bit like a broken record. Your awareness is your number one self-defense key. You know, as we've mentioned before, if you're aware of your surroundings, you can notice danger before you're in the middle of it and you can avoid it altogether. But in the case where you feel like you want to introduce a weapon into it, you want to make sure you've got that weapon out and ready before your opponent even gets close enough to be able to take that weapon from you. And the weapon being ready is important. You want to make sure that if it's a firearm, that the safety's off, especially if it's going to be something like pepper spray. You also want to be aware of, do you have your weapon with you? I used to carry a knife with me all the time in my pocket, just as a general tool, but then we start working at Kids Unlimited and you can't carry a knife into school, so I just started leaving my knife at home. So if I needed to use it all of a sudden, first thing I got to do is think about, do I have it with me? Then I have to think about, where's it at? Which pocket is it in? Do I have it in my holster? Do I have it behind me? Do I have it on my side? You need to be aware of every aspect of this so that you can utilize the tool properly. Something a lot of people may not think about when they're carrying a lethal weapon like a firearm is you should also be carrying a non-lethal weapon like pepper spray that you're going to use before you go to that firearm. You also have to be well practiced on being able to transition between dropping that pepper spray and drawing your firearm before that danger gets too close. So now let's go ahead and talk about, regardless of which weapon you pick, how do you keep that weapon and keep your opponent from using it? To begin with, we're going to assume that your awareness is up and that you've already seen the danger, so you've got your weapon out and ready. So from there, you want to keep in mind that distance is your best friend. You got to be ready to move your feet. Now, the advantage of taking unarmed combat or even an armed combat like Kali is you focus a lot of fighting while you move your feet. Very important, especially in Kali. When's the last time you practiced moving your feet out on the gun range? Because obviously as you're moving around, that's going to lower your accuracy unless you've practiced with it. It's also hard to hit a moving target, so if you can move while you're shooting or move while you're striking, it's going to be hard for them to counterattack. Your final line of defense is going to be your correct stance and your empty hand skills. So for instance, if I've got a knife, most of the time if you got a knife, you're holding the knife out in front of you because it makes it closer to your opponent, gives you more reach with it. Problem is, if that opponent is getting close to you, it also means it makes it easier for them to grab it. So if I can take a stance and put the knife behind me, they now have to get through me to get to the knife, especially if I'm using a framing arm to keep them away. Now my framing arm, not only can it keep him away, but I can also grab a hold of him to make sure he doesn't get away. And that's going to allow me to go to work with this if I really need to. Now that rear stance is also the same thing you would be using if you had a handgun or even a long gun. Now the difference is I'm going to be framing with my handgun, I want to make sure I get that frame up, because if I have my frame out here, I'm getting shot in my arm and I'm getting shot in my hand. But if I can keep it here, it keeps my arm and my hand out of the way, I can get the gun behind me, and if he comes in to get me, I can keep him away with that elbow. Wherever he moves, I can keep that elbow out in front of me. When your weapon's out and ready, the other thing you should be thinking about is what is it that's attaching you to that weapon. Typically your clubs, a lot of knives, long guns, even handguns have lanyards. They thought about this way back in the days when they even fought with swords. A lot of people don't realize that the tassel on your sword was actually meant to help tie it to your wrist so you had a harder time losing it when you dropped it. In a case like a rifle where you're using a sling, you want to make sure it's comfortably adjusted where you can sling it behind you, and then also get comfortable with slinging it and unslinging it, being ready to use that weapon at any time. We've seen a couple of videos where a police officer is trying to detain somebody. They've got a long gun with the sling on it, but they don't have the sling properly adjusted, so they're fighting, holding on to the one weapon while they're trying to use their empty hand, where they should just have it set up where they can just let it go and they don't have to worry about it anymore. Now let's say that you've done your best to try to keep your distance and try to keep the weapon away from the opponent, but now they're either reaching for it, or worse, they actually got a hold of it. So now you've got a couple of different options here. Option number one is to shut down their computer. Option number two would be to take control back of that weapon. Or last-ditch effort, option number three would be to get rid of the weapon. Now, if you're going to toss the weapon, make sure you're aware of where you're tossing it. You don't want to be giving it over to his buddies. If you've got a buddy there helping you out, maybe toss it in the direction of your buddies so that now they can pick up the weapon and utilize that tool. Let's talk first of all about what it means to shut down your computer. What can we use to do that? We have a whole self-defense video that we shot about self-defense techniques to use. Main thing to keep in mind, I want to try not to punch with a closed hand. I can use hammer strikes, I can use palm strikes, elbow strikes, knee strikes. Knee strikes and kicking the groin, that's a really good reset button. I could use low kicks to be able to distract him. I want to try not to do any taekwondo kicks where I could be brought down to the ground though. If I'm going to kick him in the head, I want to bring him to a position where I can easily kick him. The first thing I want to be aware of is the weakness in his grip. So when he grabs it, you can see on this side he's got 4 fingers, on that side he's got 1 thumb. So the thumb is going to be the weakest part of that grip. Also, the way his wrist wants to turn, it turns fine forward and back, but what it doesn't turn very good on is side to side like this. So I can combine these concepts with a circle that really makes it easy to get his hand off my weapon. Now, the key about the circle is the circle's really hard to resist. For instance, if I throw a punch and he just tries to move my arm one-dimensionally, I can fight back against him. But if he moves it in the circle, I have no idea where he's going next, and he moves me everywhere. Circles are definitely superior for being able to control somebody. Some extra things on this is when he grabs my weapon and I put 2 hands on my weapon, I can actually pin his hand to my weapon and cause a dislocation in his wrist in the process of me breaking his grip. Then I can go right into shutting the computer down after that. The other thing we want to be thinking about is our footwork. If he's got a hold of my weapon, I don't want to be trying to wrestle him strength for strength with my arms. I want to be able to use my footwork to move to a weaker spot and use my whole body to move that weapon. As my body moves, this weapon's going to move. And we get more onto this concept when we get into longer weapons like staff or rifles. We wanted to show a little more detail of what this footwork is doing. First of all, it doesn't matter what hand he grabs with, I'm going to be moving behind that elbow. I'll be doing that by stepping around in a circle with my foot that's closest to that elbow. Same time I'm doing that step, I'm going to be grabbing that stick and starting my circle. To get the release to happen, I'm going to do an open gate swing and press downward. This is going to put me in a position where I'm behind him now instead of in front of him. We'll talk a little bit more about that technique, this time applying it to the knife. So I'll be in this bracing position. Since he's so close to me, he's not going to grab the blade because he could cut himself. So chances are he's going to be grabbing my wrist. This is okay. What I want to avoid is taking my arm away to grab his wrist because now I don't have control over him anymore. So this is where from this guard, I want to get 2 hands on this wrist. So I'm going to leave my elbow up and grab his arm. This is going to still keep him at a distance. If he wants to try to punch me, I got a way that I can avoid that punch. But I want to be on the move already. So I'm going to be starting this step behind his elbow, lifting the weapon up. And then I'm going to use this gate swing to avoid his punch, also having my entire body move this weapon in front of me to where now I can escape and even do a slash across his wrist. So in that movement, there's some hidden strikes. He's braced in here, he grabs my wrist. When I step in, this could be a cut right across his leg. And then I circle that around and there's a cut right down on his wrist. If I feel like he's going after the gun, it's for me to get a hold of it first. I'm here holding him off. Now again, I've cut transition from this position here to being back here to keeping him away and getting the gun away as far as possible. I see him getting close to the gun, I might grab a hold of it with two hands as well. I still have the ability to shoot from here as long as my hand's not in front of the muzzle, so be careful of that. As I'm doing my motions this way, I want to be careful that I don't point the muzzle at myself, that I don't point the muzzle at my friends. I either want the muzzle pointing down at the ground or at the person who's trying to take my gun away from me. In this case, if I'm holding him off and I grab and he's wrestling for my weapon too, I've got my elbow strike still, and I can even strike with the gun itself to create some distance to get a gunshot off if I need to. So that's really one of the keys, is to remember not to be the monkey with his hand stuck in the cookie jar. A lot of times, Cro-Magnon brain goes, me have tool, me use tool. Where sometimes I need to forget about the tool and maybe go to my unarmed combat or the backup tool that I might have in my pocket. Let me show you up close what this two-hand grip looks like. So first thing is I want to make sure I don't get my hand too close to the muzzle, because that's how I'm going to get flash burn or even a bullet going through part of my hand. I want to grab back on the slide. Now the thing I want to be careful of is I grab on the slide, if I'm not pushing right, I'm going to move that slide out of battery, which means the gun's not going to fire. So what I really want to do is my front hand I want to push forward, my back hand I want to pull back. That's going to keep the gun in battery. Now at this point I might be able to get one shot off, but after I get that one shot off, I'm going to have to re-rack the slide so I can fire another one. I want to show you that on the revolver it's a little bit different. I need to be careful not to grab the cylinder. If I'm holding the cylinder, when I pull the trigger, the hammer's going to move a little bit, but the cylinder's not going to turn, which is going to prevent the mechanisms from making its full action to fire off a bullet. So that means I need to be holding the barrel in front of the gun, which the barrel's going to get hot, and I'm probably going to get a little bit of flash burn coming out of the cylinder itself. But if it means that I get a shot or two off and be able to get my distance to get a good grip on the gun, it's going to be worth that powder burn or a little bit of burn from the barrel. Not much changes by the time we apply this to a walking stick. If he grabs it, one hand, again, I grab two hands. I'm going to step in a circle off to his elbow. I'm going to gate swing around while I circle this, which is actually going to cause a strike to the back of his head. I've got the longer end of the weapon toward the bottom, so that works out. It's the same thing if he grabs below, but this time when I grab on, I can actually grab a hold of that pinky, so it's going to cause a lot more pain, possibly some dislocation in his wrist if I do this enough. As I step to the side, I can put my elbow right along the staff. That's going to help me control this with my whole arm, so that when I gate swing around, there's that strike. I have an arm bar worked in here, I got a strike here, I still have a hold of that pinky. If I already have it out in front of me, I want to be doing the same thing with my footwork. I don't have to worry about grabbing his hand though. He's all the way at the end. That's probably where he's going to be if he's threatening me. I'm going to be pressing this down, stepping toward the elbow. I'm going to gate swing back toward him, and that gets my weapon back. If he happens to grab it with both hands, I'm following the same general rule. In this case, I'm going to be moving toward his elbow, stepping in the circle, circling this down and around as I step back with my foot in a gate swing and strike down on his head. Changes a little bit if he's grabbed from the outside. I'm not necessarily going to be able to come around on this side of his elbow because he's got a really strong grip on this other side. I can, however, travel toward that elbow. I'm going to be stepping, lifting, gate swing as I press down, and there's my strike. Those same techniques with the staff will also work with a long gun, like a rifle or a shotgun. Advantages now, I've got one dangerous point at the very tip of this if I pull my trigger. But if he grabs a hold of the tip of it, I've got that same thing where I'm going to use my footwork, I step down and around, and I've got the joint lock. You'll also notice that at any time during that position, when I'm circling down, I can shoot him in the leg, I can shoot him in the ribs at any point. He gets a hold of it with two hands. Now, I again have a dangerous point right here. I don't want to be wrestling for the muzzle because he's fighting and he's got more control of that end. Instead, this is the advantage of having a weapon with a stock. If you got one of those shotguns that has the pistol grip on it, I'm going to have as hard a time fighting for this weapon as he is. If I've got a stock that I can pull into my shoulder and hug into my body, it stays to my body. All I have to do is reposition my body to get the muzzle to point the direction it's going to fire. Now, alternatively, when he grabs a hold of it with two hands, I might be trying to circle down first, but he's resisting my circle down. So I need to change my direction and go to circle up. Notice how immediately I was able to bring the muzzle to face towards him. I might even in that case have to decide to change the direction I'm moving to be able to get the muzzle. And notice I can even still strike him with the muzzle of the gun as well. There's also an alternative where you can use the stock of the rifle as an actual weapon, especially if it's a good heavy wooden stock or a polycarbonate stock. I can come around this way, get this weapon over the top of his wrist. If he starts pushing it around, I just take the stock around and I can strike him with the stock. Right behind the ear, the side of the blade, or even to the teeth, I can take some teeth out with that thing. The thing we have to keep in mind in a situation where somebody's trying to get a hold of my weapon is I need to continue my assault until they are no longer a threat. I'm not going to end it in one strike with my stick or one stab with my knife or one shot with my gun. In fact, statistics show that it takes at least 4 shots, regardless of what caliber you're using, whether that's a 22 pistol or 44, 4 shots it's going to take on average to stop somebody unless you can hit them in the right spot. So you want to be prepared to be able to transition to your empty hand combat or your backup weapon if you have one. Now let's talk about the worst case scenario. This person is after your weapon, they've gotten past your defenses, and now they're tackling you trying to get it. Now, first thing I want to mention that we mentioned before is you always have the option of ditching the weapon. If you haven't drawn the weapon out, it might just be as easy as pulling it out and dropping it in your pocket. Now he's got to reach in to try to get it. But if you've already got the weapon out and you need to get rid of it, be careful where you're getting rid of it to. Make sure you know who's around you. Ultimately, if that fight goes on the ground, you can't stay there. If he's got friends, you're in trouble, especially if there's weapons involved, you're in trouble. You have to be able to get up safely and get away to safety. And so we have a whole video that we shot on grappling for self-defense that shows how to do that. But basically what we're going to be doing is showing how to, if this goes to the ground, escape and also maintain control of that weapon, because that's our main concern at this point. Just like before, we're going to be starting our training with the stick. It's the safest thing for me to practice my technique with. Also, we're starting this from the guard position, which is my position of control. So if he grabs my stick, this is the same technique we were using from standing. I want to push over the top of his wrist and then straight down. If he's got both hands, same thing, over the top and straight down. That's going to get him to release the stick. Now I have control of it. But since we're grappling, I can't just use my arms like that. He's going to be fighting for this stick, so I'm going to have to use my shrimping to involve my whole body. If he's just got one hand on my stick, that's the main hand I need to be thinking about. I'm going to grab on with both hands. If I need to, I can even grab his fingers. But I'm going to shrimp to the side while I push this right over the top. I got my foot right in his hip right here. So once I push down, I can actually push away with my feet, and now I have a better ability to get up safely, especially since I'm the one with the weapon. To show you, it applies the same way with the knife, only the thing is he won't be grabbing this part of the knife. That's going to be what cuts him. He's probably going to be grabbing my hand. He might even have it with 2 hands. So anytime he gets a hold of my weapon or my weapon hand, I got to get 2 hands involved. I'm going to grab my own hand if I can, but it's the same thing. I'm using my elbow going up and over the top and straight down while I shrimp. Now I have the knife here. I have the ability to push him away and get up to safety. Very similar if I have a gun. He might get a hold of just my wrist or just the barrel, or he might get a hold of both. I want to be controlling the muzzle, the business end of this. So same thing, I'm going to go up over the top of the wrist and go straight down to get him to let go. But I wanted to show with my shrimp. If I shrimp this way, I just turn the muzzle of the gun toward me, and I don't want that. That was me just getting shot in my knee. Not that I meant to make that rhyme. But look, if I shrimp the opposite direction, I'm going to be shrimping the muzzle up. Now as I push down, that was pointed right at him. I also had a wrist lock there. He really wanted to let go of this gun at this point, and now I have the ability to use it. If you have a longer weapon like a walking stick or a rifle, if this was a rifle, I think this is the muzzle, this is the business end, this is the one I have to be aware of. But same thing, if he's got me, I'm going to go up over the top of the wrist and push down. That's going to break his grip on this. I have my shrimp position to be able to push him away. If this was a rifle, again, I was drawing that muzzle closer to me, so I've got to be careful. I want to, just like with the handgun, when I shrimp, I'm going to lift that up so that when I push down, that rifle's putting right at his head. Worst of the worst scenarios, he's on top of me and I don't have my guard. We're fighting over the weapon. I'm going to be using my bucking technique. I need to get one of his hands off my weapon. Now, I can try to fight him from here, but he's pretty strong. I don't have much maneuverability. So first thing I'm going to do is give him a nice little buck. He's going to get one hand off the weapon. Now you'll see, like, if I try to just grab this arm that's really strong, I'm not going to be able to roll him that way. So from where I had my weapon, I need to come from the inside and attack this elbow to break it down. Now you can see how his face is almost going to the floor. I'm going to trap this foot. I'm going to roll him in that direction. Now I'm ending up in his guard. He still has a hold of my weapon, so here's my technique. If he grabbed onto both from here, same thing on the 1-2, and now I've got my stick out, or whatever this weapon is, I can use it to help me safely get away. The last thing we want to talk about is what happens if you've got your self-defense weapon, but you haven't gotten into play and they're on top of you already. You know, if they're already here and you haven't drawn your weapon, you need to create space before you draw that weapon. Otherwise, they're going to stuff up your draw, they're going to have control of your arm, or worse yet, control of your weapon, and that's the whole thing we're trying to avoid. So if I can create space by creating a frame before I reach for my weapon, that will help. Or even getting out of there, moving your feet to create space is another good way. Otherwise, if I have a good retention holster or a good way of retaining my weapon on my hip, then I don't have to worry about him grabbing it. I can just work on shutting down his computer. We have a whole bunch of techniques on our self-defense techniques video. You can check that out. Really good at being able to shut the guy's computer down. If he's not able to get that out of your holster, you don't have to worry about that anymore. Now, outside of a good retention holster, if you decide to use a long gun as a self-defense weapon, they do have a retention hook that can hook onto your belt or one of your belt loops so that you can hook it onto your weapon and then just let the weapon go hand to hand, and you don't have to worry about them taking the weapon away from you. Things like sticks, a lot of times you have a lanyard as a retention, like especially if it's a walking stick. They'll usually have a lanyard. If you drop your stick, it stays stuck to your wrist. Now, if you have a knife, you've got a couple of different things with the knife. You've either got the kind of knife that's in a sheath, and in that case, how good is the retention on it? This one, you have to undo Velcro, which could be hard to do in the moment, so somebody trying to take it might be difficult. You also notice the knife's not just coming out there, it's got this clip on it. You actually have to give it a good pull to get it out of place. So again, something like that would distract them, and they wouldn't be able to use it right away. And of course, two things with that. You have to be familiar with how to get it out of its retention devices quickly so you can use it. Also being aware that that's going to help keeping the bad guy from using it. And that's actually one of the advantages of the fixed blade knife versus a folding knife. The fixed blade knife, as soon as you get it out, it's ready to be used. On the other hand, with the folding knife, you got to get it out of your pocket first. Once it's out of your pocket, you then have to get it open to be able to use it. Now, to keep that in mind, if you're able to get it out to your pocket and not deploy the blade yet, it can still be used like this, especially if it's a knife that has one of those knife ice breakers or window breakers on the end of it. You could still use that to crush bone and hit pressure points, cause injury. And legally, I didn't use the dangerous end of it, so it might even be better for me. I could say that I did not intend great bodily harm when I was using it. Just keeping in mind, if you're using it that way, your opponent can still get a hold of it, and then they have a knife, so we got to be aware of where that knife's at. So, we can teach you all of these techniques and tactics. The tactics, they can be applied just right away by hearing them. The techniques, on the other hand, you're not going to be able to use them unless you practice them. So I recommend go to a local martial arts school around you. If you're here in Southern Oregon, check us out at dojo2u.com and we can give you all kinds of good training.